Welcome in, everyone. I'm excited to get to do another video. We're trying it virtual this time. We did in person the last few recordings, and just so we can put out more videos for you, we're trying to do it virtually this time and see how that goes. So give us feedback if you thought it worked well, or we need to go back to only in person, and then that's our goal is to do them that way. But don't want to let the distance between me and other people to be a limitation on what we can produce. So I'm excited about this discussion. So just any of you that have been kind of watching our episodes, we're going to record twice a month as our goal. We're going to record one video where Austin and I are talking about a biblical topic. We're applying it specifically to business finances. And then a few weeks later, our goal is to sit down with a business owner, talk about their testimony and hear their story. So that's the rhythm we're trying to get into, and hopefully we'll be successful with that. So today, Austin and I are going to talk about a topic. I got kind of the vision for this a few weeks ago. Just God was laying it on my heart during our Sunday service a few weeks ago. Austin and I started talking about the topic, and each of us, just so you know, each of us, we kind of work separately on the topic. We discuss that. We dig into the word, try and hear from God separately, and then we come together and discuss that topic and kind of wrap it up for our listeners and just help give them encouragement or advice or just share a perspective and how to apply it to your business finances. So today's topic is about sowing. And before I kick it over to Austin, specifically around this topic of sowing, I think there's a lot of discussion about sowing. If you just search, verses about sowing, there's almost hundreds of verses about it. The important thing that I am kind of thinking about today and what's been put on my heart is there is sowing and there's reaping. And when I think about sowing and reaping, it seems very much like it would apply to business. We talk about return on investment from a natural perspective. If you're sowing and you're reaping, you hope for your reaping to be larger than your sowing. And that gets you ROI. That's kind of capitalism. That's businesses. And that's the whole purpose. But in the sense of what we're talking about is sowing specifically. And there's a lot of instances where you're sowing into the kingdom and you're not necessarily sowing with an expectation of reaping yourself. So that's kind of the topic here that we want to delve into. So I spent a lot more time, and that was a little bit of rambling, but I'll let Austin get us started on the discussion.
Sure. So sowing is, when I think of sowing, I think of it most clearly in like an evangelistic context. So there's a verse in, I'll pull up my notes. There's a verse in 1 Corinthians 3. It says, I planted the seed, Apollos watered it, but God has been making it grow. And so the whole idea, like sowing immediately for me, and I'll connect it to kind of the context of what we do as business leaders, just as people. But sowing, this whole idea of who are the people in my life that I have the opportunity to impact with faith, with the gospel. And so I remember years ago, I had a young woman when I was a youth pastor who she'd been inviting friends to church, inviting friends to church, inviting friends to church. And she was really frustrated because they didn't come with her invites. But another girl in the youth group says, hey guys, why don't you come to church? And she shows up to youth, and the friends she'd been inviting for months were standing there. And they're like, hey, we made it. And she's like, yeah, how'd you get here? Oh, she brought us. And this young woman was really upset because in her mind, I'd been sowing into these people for months. I've been investing. I've been pouring time and energy, and they came with her. And so I just pulled her aside and I just reminded her, like, but you planted that seed. You persisted for months to invite them to church. You spent time investing in them. You spent time investing in that. And sure, maybe they came with her, but ultimately God's the one who gets the glory. Like God is the one that really ultimately pulled on their hearts to get here. And so that's always with the whole idea of sowing. There's another verse, I think it's in 2 Corinthians, it says, whoever sows sparingly reaps sparingly. And so the whole idea that if we're not using the opportunities we have from God to sow what he has given us to sow, we don't have as many opportunities. The less we sow, the fewer opportunities we have to reap the benefits of that. Ultimately, though, the goal being God gets all the glory. And so it always just ties back to that parable of the talents that Jesus teaches in Matthew 24, where he talks about the master gives three of his three of his guys an investment, and one guy just goes and buries it and is like, this is too sacred, I don't want to do anything with this, I'm nervous about what's going to happen. And another guy goes and invests it and brings back more, and another guy he does the same thing. And this is where like the famous well done good and faithful servant verse comes from, because the master is pleased that I entrusted you with something, and you went and sowed that, and you're now reaping the benefits of that. And then he looks at the guy who didn't really do anything with it and just kind of hid and buried it, and he's just like, you're lazy, you're wicked, like you didn't do anything with it, what was the point? And so he kind of ties up the whole thing, this whole story here in Matthew 25 verse 29. He says, for whoever has will be given more, and they will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even what they do have will be taken from them. So this whole idea of when we utilize what God has given us to bring him glory and honor and praise, that investment will grow exponentially more than if we just let it squander in a corner. And I think this is what's so important in life with this is where it expands beyond just evangelism, because we all have talents, we all have skills, we all have gifts and abilities. And when we use those to serve God, I do believe that there is a reward we reap. And we say reward, and it's always like, yeah, we make money. But I think there are other rewards that come. There are other benefits we reap as a result. But, you know, I see more success in people when they want to use what God gave them. They see more success when they use it to honor God than when they're just trying to make money. Like that's like I'm coaching soccer right now, and they said, the goal isn't to win, the goal is to teach the kids how to play well. And I said, absolutely, of course. If I teach the kids how to play well, we'll win. And so when you focus on the fundamentals and what God has given you, you're bound to win. You're bound to succeed. You're bound to reap the benefits of your hard work. So that's kind of like the pastoral view of, I guess.
Not to get too deep in that, but I believe there's also a verse about run the race to win, not to
100%.
just run the race. But no, I think you had a couple of good things in there, and I came to some similar conclusions, especially around, you know, you're talking about that story of the lady inviting her friend and was planting that seed, and then in a sense, she didn't see the reaping or the harvest of that. She did, but maybe she felt like, wait, you know, it seems like that person harvested, I didn't harvest. And so I think there's two important things, especially as we talk about sowing in business and, you know, what that means and what we're really trying to talk about here is, so there's two verses that I think apply and resonate with what you were saying, which is Ecclesiastes 11:6. Sow your seed in the morning, and at evening let your hands not be idle, for you do not know which will succeed, whether this or that, or whether both will do equally well. And also when you hear about the parable of, Jesus shared the parable about sowing, that one is specifically talking about the word and how you share the word. And, you know, some have roots and it'll get overcrowded, and some ground is not fertile. But these verses in that parable, it's important to remember that we're not responsible for the watering. We're not responsible for the harvest necessarily. We may see it, but we're responsible for being obedient and sowing, right? So when we're seeking God and he's asking us to sow, it's about obedience. It's about us taking that action. I was having coffee this morning with someone, they're a C12 chair, and we were actually talking about a little bit different thing here, but his message around it was it resonated with what we were going to talk about. He was talking about prophecy, and he was speaking about prophecy and what the interaction is supposed to be. And you probably know this better, but he was explaining to me, you know, Old Testament prophecy is, hey, if the prophecy doesn't come true, you go stone the prophet. He's like, that's not New Testament prophecy. He said it's on us. If we receive a prophecy, say over our business, it's for us to test it. Does it align to God's word? Does it align to where God is leading us? And then it's for us to take action and you know, drive that prophecy to conclusion. That it's on us to receive it and water that prophecy, in a sense, like sowing. But the other thing here that you said with your story, I think is important. I'm not going to try and point fingers at this lady. I don't even know who she is, but sometimes, you know, you would hope the response is, oh, they're here. It doesn't matter who brought them, right, necessarily. But one of the things that can get us in trouble, and I think you were trying to touch on, is Galatians 6:8. Whoever sows to please their flesh, from flesh will reap destruction. Whoever sows to please the Spirit, from the Spirit will reap eternal life. And that's what I was talking about kind of at the beginning of this in the verse that's important to understand is there is this concept of sowing, reaping, you're getting a harvest. There is gain, there is benefit to you in some of these instances, but it's what are you looking at as a harvest, right? In that instance, the harvest was another person, coming to, worship and honor God, and maybe they give their lives to God because they show up. That's the true harvest, not that one person said yes to me or that type of thing. And so in the context of, I think, what we're talking about today, it's important to remember that, like, I think it's okay to think about a harvest, but what harvest are you focused on? Are you focused on the spiritual or the natural, the flesh side of it?
Yeah, that's really good. Something that's been on my mind a lot lately, and you just hearing you talk really kind of brought it back to the forefront of my mind, is just this whole idea of what's the position of my heart. Because I think the greatest challenge we face in life is people constantly question our motives. They constantly question, why are we doing what we're doing? Oh, they're just trying to make money. They're just trying to be big. Oh, they're just trying to raise a platform to stand on, whatever it might be. But it's the whole idea. The question I keep asking myself is, okay, there are these things that these thoughts, these criticisms that exist in the world of people, of me, of you. But what's the position of my heart? It's like the whole reality is, or perception is reality. I kind of push back against that because people are going to think what they're going to think, but we are held accountable for what we do and how we respond. And so I may be pursuing something that God is laying on my heart and really just diving headfirst into that thing, trying to sow a vision that the Lord is giving me, a direction in my life or for my family, or a dream or whatever it is that God is very clearly saying, hey, this is what you need to do. This whole, I thought about it with that story just as you were talking, even like, what's the position? And that's where I was trying to correct, like help lead, not correct, but help lead that young woman is like, where's the position of your heart here, right? It's like that verse in Galatians says, whoever sows to please their flesh. Well, in that moment, the position of your heart is to please your flesh, not to bring glory and honor to God. And so if the position of our heart is always to give God all the glory, all the honor, all the praise, there's almost this, and this sounds really callous, but there's almost this subtle art of not giving a care what anyone thinks, because the position of our heart is to give God glory, honor, and praise. So there is that tension we balance sometimes of, how do I pursue this thing that God is calling me to do? How do I sow this venture, this vision, this business, this plan, this investment, this idea, this gift, whatever? How do I sow this while recognizing and being okay with how that may be perceived by other people? Because at the end of the day, I'm not trying to please earthly masters. I'm trying to please a heavenly king. And so it's that tension is really hard to balance in life. But it's this question for myself that I keep asking, almost like when I'm praying and getting ready to do anything. It's just, Lord, what's the position of my heart? Like, I find myself in prayer. I was talking to someone yesterday about this. In prayer, I sometimes feel this need to like dress it up. So I'm just like, I'm laying in bed at night, decompressing from the day and just praying and talking to God and dressing it up. And I catch myself and I'm just, Lord, like, I'm saying these nice things, but you know what I'm actually thinking as I say them. Why do I dress this up for you? But it's that same thing in life, that when we're pursuing and sowing whatever it is God is calling us to sow and obeying his call on our lives, like, who are we to question or to doubt or be fearful about what any other person in our life may think? Yes, talk with your wife, your spouse, your partner, and hear what they have to say. That's important. But if you guys are both pursuing the same thing, which is faith in Jesus Christ, on giving God all the glory, honor, and praise, then they'll be in step with you as you pursue this vision, as you sow this dream, as you sow this business or this plan or investment or whatever it might be.
That's a whole side topic. If you're praying, your wife is praying, and you guys aren't aligned, then you should probably pause and ask some more questions and seek prayer more. But anyways, we won't track too much on that. So I think we've kind of introed this topic of sowing pretty well. I think those kind of some ground rules as we jump into it, or foundational things is make sure you're sowing to the Spirit, spiritual reasons, but also remembering that if God asks you to sow, it's not on you to own the harvest. It's on you to be obedient in that call from God. So I want to jump in. These are, I think, just a couple of ideas, bringing us back to business finances. Topic seems kind of far off from business finances, but just kind of bring it back down to that. And the intent is these are a couple of instances or ideas to share around this concept of sowing in your business. And I definitely am not saying these are the only instances, but just want to encourage people as you think about these, do they resonate? Is this something you need to look at for your business, or maybe you just want to pray about, God, what's sowing in my business look like for me specifically, and seek out other ideas. But the first kind of concept and where I'm drawing these from is it's areas where I have advised clients. It's maybe advising that has come into me from mentors, or sometimes our clients are speaking into us as well. So that's kind of where we're drawing these from. And then, I don't want to limit God and what he wants to communicate on this message. So these are just a couple of ideas out there. But the first one, I call this kind of sacrificial sowing. So I've been in places and I've seen other business owners in places where they're struggling greatly with a challenge for their business. Sometimes it is financial. Maybe it's a cash flow issue. There's Thursday and Friday is payroll and they don't have enough money in the bank account. Or maybe it's not that dire, but it's a few months off, and it's pretty clear by the way things are going. And this could look like, I call it sacrificial sowing. So it's sowing that goes along with prayer, right? You're already crying out to God for help. Lord, I need you to show up. Here's my challenge. How do we resolve this? I don't know how to do this in my ability. I need your super on my natural, as my pastor would say. And so in this idea, it could be an instance where you're looking, a couple months out, you don't see how you're going to keep your business alive. Your cash is going, but you're praying, you're asking for a miracle and asking for that change in your business. Add alongside to that, Lord, is there something you want me to sow into? And that may look like this thing is you're turned on to, hey, go sow into this person. Like, I know you think that you're running out of cash, but hey, take some of what you have and go pour into this other project or this person or what this need is. And, the verse that really resonated with this is Psalms 126, which is those who go out weeping, carrying seed to sow, will return with songs of joy, carrying sheaves with them. And I just think the first half of this verse is important. Like, hey, you're in that dire position. You're praying to God. You're asking for a miracle, but you're carrying seed to sow. You're still willing and able to hear from God and listen. What we said, right, is it's about obedience. In this instance, you might not even know what the result of that is. God may turn you on to something that hasn't been on your radar at all, and it has nothing to do with your business. And he's asking you to pour some resource into.
Yeah, this whole idea of sacrificial sowing is so counterintuitive to like our natural tendency, right? Like our natural instinct is make sure the lights are on, make sure food's on the table, whatever, like make sure the bare bones are cared for. And so there's just such a measure of faith it takes to step into that sacrificial sowing, like knowing this goes against every fiber of my being, but this is something God is saying to do. And I think I've always pushed back. It's like what is it? God will never call me to do something that makes me uncomfortable. No, that's exactly what God's going to do, because it's when you're uncomfortable. Like Paul says, I boast all the more gladly in my weaknesses, for when I am weak, I am then made strong. Because it's when we're in that sacrifice, that stretch, that's where God works most. And so knowing that it's counterintuitive, it goes against every fiber of your being to sacrifice in whatever capacity it may be. But because it's from God, you're going to step out in faith. I have always found for myself, in whatever circumstance that I've done that, God has always made sure that the things that needed to be taken care of were taken care of. The things that needed to, and it's not even that, but it's often, and I don't want to get into like a prosperity kind of gospel here, but I have found that there was extra. There was always leftover. Like the feeding of the 5,000. What was it, 2 fish and a loaf of bread, and then there were leftovers, and it was just a couple people saying, look, this is all I got, right? Or I know one of the things we talked about is the woman with the 2 coins, and she just says, look, this is everything I have. And the Pharisees are like, we got a lot more than that. Here, Jesus, take it. Here, we got a few extra bucks more than her. And he says, she's shown more faith than you guys, because she sacrificially gave up what she had. She experienced sacrifice, she experienced need. And so for that, she'll be honored so much more than that. And I think that's really like where sacrificial sowing grows our faith so much, is that we are fully and wholly trusting God with whatever it is that He's saying, you need to do this thing. And it's so, the harvest we reap there is exponential faith. It's this just growth of our faith far greater than anything. Our capacity for faith increases significantly when we sacrifice that way, as opposed to, well, I know you want me to do this, God, but I can't do it. So let's pray about it some more. And then we just don't act. So
Yeah, I think that's yeah, I think that's important. And you said something interesting there, because one of the things that we'll advise our clients on, right, which is every single dollar you spend should have a return. It can seem small, but like, hey, you're paying $20 a month for ChatGPT. Like, you should expect there to be some benefit, right? When we're in business, every dollar, no matter what it is supposed to get a return. I mean, we pay $10 a month to have our email address with a domain. I see value in that, right? It demonstrates a professionalism over having a at Gmail account. Abbott CFO at Gmail just seems a little less professional than being able to have our name at abbottcfo.com. It's, is it large? Maybe not, but we're spending $10 a month per email. Um, you know, Simple things like that. And what you talked about is it kind of goes against the natural or normal kind of convention, which is true. We'll always advise that with a client. And I think where we look at this is, in these situations, we may challenge our clients to have this prayer, right, as they're seeking solutions, and we've advised them on what best strategies are out there. But if a client comes to me and says, hey, I did pray into this and this is what we'd like to do, we're going to go find a way to make that happen, help them make that happen, and then we're going to work from there. It's going to be a new baseline of what we need to achieve, right? But that's creating that tension in the space of, yeah, there's normal, natural convention, but you know that's kind of why we're bringing up this topic, is there's other ways to look at things, and concepts to apply in. So I think what you brought up there is important and good for us to highlight. The other kind of area that to me is sowing, and specifically around business owners. And while this doesn't necessarily directly tie with finances, our two biggest resources are money, but also time. And the second area is really sowing into people. And, in this instance, I'm really thinking about going back to our original foundation that we were talking about on this is, sure, Austin works for me and I can spend more time with him and train him more and do those things, right? But that's going to benefit our business for a return out of that. But I really think about sowing into people and that concept of, you're a business owner. I mentioned I was talking to the C12 owner or C12 chair this morning, and we were talking about this a little bit. For a lot of people, the bigger limitation is time and not money. And so this could be an area, God, where are you asking me to sow? And it may be going and mentoring someone, and it could be outside the industry. It could be in a business context. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's just taking time away from your business to sow into an individual at church or something like that. And the verse that really aligns with this is Proverbs 11. It really 25, but I'll go through 24 and 25. Is one person gives freely, yet gains even more. Another withholds unduly, but comes to poverty. And so a generous person will prosper. Whoever refreshes others will be refreshed, right? So in this context, they're really talking about refreshing others, pouring into others, and giving that. And so the second area from sowing that I really think about is how do you use your time, praying about, hey, who Lord do you want me to sow time into? And especially I'm thinking about the context of outside your direct team necessarily, that you're pouring into them and sowing without necessarily expecting something better for your business.
Sowing into people is, as a leader, you said it, time. Like, it takes time. And I had this friend, I call this the Greg Scott principle. There's a guy I knew, Greg Scott, that was his name. And he had such a hard time getting plugged in to serve at church, any other churches he went to, because he always, the Lord had always blessed him financially. And he always said, whatever you need, I'll cut a check. You need more money for this? I got you. I'll cut a check because I can go out and make more money. You need me to come in on my day off and do something? I can't get my time back. I can't go out and find more time. Like, this life is limited. And the Lord convicted his heart over time that money's not the sacrifice for you. Time is the sacrifice for you. And so he experienced this whole like transformation in his like thought process, and really that positioning of his heart that you're right. I will still faithfully give to the Lord financially, but I need to give him my time. And so the Greg Scott principle is this whole idea that money's not the sacrifice, time is. And that's the most challenging part of sowing into people is time. It takes time. It's time that I could be doing something for the business that makes the business money. It's time on my time. It's less time for me. It's time that I could be spending working on work. So now I'm sacrificing daytime, and I'm going to have to sit down at night after the kids are in bed to get caught up on work because I gave time in the day. But again, I think regardless, there's always a sacrificial element to sowing. But sowing into people is especially interesting because, I mean, I think of our relationship. You were sowing time and energy and effort into our relationship long before I came to work for you. And what that resulted in is benefit for me, role, something I can support my family with. And for you, I came along and, I've been able to take some off your plate so you can take on more and continue to build the business. But the return in sowing into people we don't always see the result of that, but it's one of those more
Or your point, I didn't know you would come work for me when we first met.
Well, that's
That
true.
was not on my radar at all, right?
When we met, I thought I was going to be a pastor till I was 80 and then I'd die in the pulpit. Like, that was the plan. And I mean, it's funny because I think back, it was 3 years ago, maybe 4 years ago, something like that, when we first met. And I mean, the context of our relationship was entirely different than it is now. But, the Lord was already orchestrating those things. Like, something he said, hey, you connect with Stephen more. And, for you, connect with Austin more. And God had I plant the seed, Apollos waters it, but God makes it grow. Right? Like, he just said, hey, sow into this relationship. But ultimately God has, and I faithfully believe that there is still so much more he's going to use our relationship to accomplish for his people, for his kingdom. So
Amen.
sowing into people is that's the thing I get most excited about, but it is so intimidating because it's just, I don't have enough time. How do I find the time, God? How do I get back that time? But that's where that sacrificial element is. And it really is one of those things most directly correlating to business, that sowing into people is an initial time investment, but it can pay off very quickly.
Yeah. And I think that's, kind of the challenge. We think about sowing when we go to church on Sunday, or we think about sowing and to our kids and, expecting this harvest. And I really believe that taking this sowing mindset into your business, whether it's your time is money, right? That's the reality. So whether it's actually financial resource that you're having to give, or it's time that you're having to give, it results in the same thing. And so I think to kind of conclude on this, the big thing that I would like to leave for people is, these two ideas are not the limitation of what sowing can mean in your business. And in that concept of sowing without necessarily expecting some benefit for your business, which seems counterintuitive, but I think there's you already highlighted this verse. So it's 2 Corinthians 9:6, which is, remember this, whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly. Whoever sows generously will also reap generously. And I want to tie this in to another verse, which is in Genesis 8:22. As long as the earth endures, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night will never cease. So kind of cutting out the middle of that, but seed time and harvest, so sowing and reaping, will never cease. So if you kind of take both of those verses, that reap sparingly, sow sparingly, reap sparingly, sow generously, reap generously, and tying that back, I really look at sparingly and generously not as a reward and big thing, but how often you're doing it. If seed time and harvest will never cease, that means there's an opportunity every day to think about sowing. And we're not necessarily benefiting from the harvest, right? We're sowing into spiritual harvest. So if we can sow generously or regularly, then the kingdom can be expanding through a harvest regularly as well. And so where I want to leave this conversation and idea and challenge our listeners is, you know, take this opportunity, the idea of a sacrificial, like you're at a challenge point, you're already praying to God, you're already crying out, add in, Lord, is there something you want me to sow into? Or maybe you're not in that position, but you're in a position where, Lord, should I be sowing into someone? Can you lead me to that person? Point me in their direction. And I will give them my time that I do not have to be able to sow into that person. There's probably hundreds of other ideas and concepts around sowing and how that will impact your business that we haven't touched on. So don't limit that idea. Just pray to God, is there something you want me to sow into? And lead me down that. And remember, it's about obedience. It's not about that in peace, but I want to leave it with those two verses in Genesis and Second Corinthians. I just encourage you to think about daily. And part of your prayer is there an opportunity to sow today? And Lord, can you help point me into that? And I think what you'll find is as you are in that mindset of sowing, there's always an opportunity, then it will be more clear when the Lord points you to it that it's an opportunity that he's asking of you. Any final thoughts, Austin, before we finish out?
No, I mean, I think you tied it up really well. I just, I always come back to just the whole idea of I can't think of the verse that popped in my head now. It left me, but just when God leads you to something, it's our responsibility to respond to it. And, it's like the doxology, I think it's Ephesians. Maybe that's a good way to end this. It says, now to him who's able to do immeasurably more than anything we can ask, imagine, or dream, according to his power at work within us. To him be all the glory, all the honor, and all the praise forever and ever. That's what comes to my mind as we tie this up. It's just like, to God be the glory.
Yes, certainly. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Hopefully you got some encouragement. You got some wisdom out of this. It's sparked a thought in your minds to implement something different in your business. If you have any questions or some ideas that you'd like us to explore, just leave a comment or email us. We'd love other ideas to talk about. We want these conversations to be beneficial for you. And if you think there's someone that would benefit from it, please share it with them. All right. Till the next one.